The accusation suggests a track record of racist and anti-Semitic behaviour by Farage while he was at Dulwich.
Categorically on the record, you did not racially abuse fellow people.
I would never, ever do it in a hurtful or insulting way.
This is all made up twaddle by people who don't want Nigel to be Prime Minister of the country.
When you have someone who says none of this happened and the people around him are saying none of this happened and the people who say it is are liars, but then there are more than 24 people who recall otherwise, that's difficult to square.
Nigel Farage's deputy says the allegations of schoolboy racism and anti-Semitism against him are all made up. Joining me is Henry Dyer, investigations correspondent, who's been looking into this for some time. Henry, since you first reported this on the 18th of November, along with your colleague Dan Boffey, the story has continued to expand and more people have come forward, right?
Yeah, so Dan and I, along with Mark Blacklock, who's been working on this story with us, we've still had other boys come forward from Dulwich College who were there at school with Farage at that time in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And many of them are coming forward and saying that they corroborate what's happening, and they're doing so in the face of denials from Farage and today and recently from Richard Tice.
Yeah, which we'll come to.
And so they're saying, and many of them on the record, that they remember what happened to Peter Ettedgui. Some feel guilty about not having done anything to stop it, kind of offering their apologies decades on for not having recognised that abuse at the time.
Yeah.
And then others are saying, other boys from ethnic minority backgrounds are coming forward and saying, some on the record, that Farage used racist language to abuse them as well.
So it's a combination of people who say they were victims of racist abuse or anti-Semitic abuse, as was the case with Peter Ettedgui, who, I mean, what he says was said to him by Nigel Farage is really shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, Peter said that Farage would sidle up to him and say Hitler was right, would talk about gassing, would make a hissing sound. People say that Farage would say Judah and just call Peter a Jew frequently and use kind of other direct anti-Semitic terms of abuse at him.
Yeah. And as we understand, you know, it was 49 years ago, but Peter is still living with the impact of that well into his adult life. Meanwhile, we've been hearing from Reform's Deputy Chair, Richard Tice, who was interviewed on BBC Radio 4 this morning and was asked about this. And he says, effectively, that the more than 24 people that you and the Guardian team have spoken to are effectively making this all up. Yes.
What's particularly intriguing about this is this doesn't seem to be an off-the-cuff remark that Richard Tice made this morning on Today. He was actually asked about these accusations on Tuesday evening on GB News. And then he made this same supposition that the people we have spoken to are lying, that it's all a load of rubbish cooked up by people who are politically motivated and have a political axe to grind. Now, some of the people we have spoken to are active in party politics, but it's a very, very small number of them. And we've been very open in saying that they are. So, for instance, there's a guy who's chair of the Liberal Democrats in Salisbury, and we included that and we told Reform that that was the case. But most of the people we've spoken to, you know, they may not agree with Farage or Reform politically, but that's not to say that it is a political motivation or a party political motivation. You know, they're not doing this on behalf of the Labour Party or the Lib Dems to come forward and talk. They're doing this as boys who were there at Dulwich who say this is what they witnessed. Yeah,
and we're talking about a very significant number of people. This is more than 24 people, as I say. And the fact that Tice is saying that these people are lying, are making this up, has been really criticised, hasn't it? We've had the Labour chair, Anna Turley, saying that it would be deplorable for Tice to say people are lying when they've had the courage to come forward to talk about what they saw, even if historic. But what we're hearing from Tice is different to what we heard from Farage, isn't it, last month? So in the days after your reporting, Farage was notably very quiet, but he did then give a TV interview where he issued sort of something like a denial, but said he was participating in what he called playground banter, and if he was racist or offensive, that was not done with any intention.
Yeah, so he said he had no intent to do it. He sort of offered a non-apology, you know, if he had, then he apologises for it, but on the other hand, he says he hadn't, you know, he kind of categorically has denied what Peter Ettedgui has said happened to him. But Tice has taken that a step further, and Tice is calling Peter Ettedgui a liar. And suggesting that Peter has made this up. Now, what's
which
notable?
Goes far stronger than what Farage has said himself, which is.
And Tice has said, well, why didn't he mention this 3 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago? This is something he said twice. This is a point Richard Tice has made twice on Today and then a few days ago on GB News. But Peter Ettedgui has spoken about this before. He spoke about it to Michael Crick when Michael Crick wrote his biography of Nigel Farage. Now, at the time, Peter Ettedgui didn't go on the record with all of it. He wasn't willing to put his name to all of it. It's a very difficult thing to do. And, Peter now finds himself at the centre of a lot of attention. So you understand why. But the times have changed. Farage is, in the ascendancy politically. And so you can understand why that might cause someone to want to step forward and go on the record and kind of talk about that very openly. But to suggest that this is only now coming out is simply not an accurate kind of telling of events of when these accusations have come out.
Tell me about the response to the story in the 3 weeks or so since you first published. How do you think it's having cut through with people who may be considering voting reform? I was interested to see the polling from YouGov on Monday that shows that slip from reform from 29% to 25%. I mean, does that have any link to this, do you think?
What these stories have really always been about is a question of character. It's a question of political character for Farage and a question of leadership. And the way that he and Reform have responded to this has made people question their political leadership. When we first went to Reform for this initial story, after a bit of back and forth with their lawyer, we eventually did get a comment from their spokesman, and their spokesman said the allegations are entirely without foundation. The Guardian has produced no contemporaneous record or corroborating evidence to support these disputed recollections from nearly 50 years ago. They said that we were seeking to discredit Reform and suggested that we were smearing the party. When other people have been faced with accusations of wrongdoing in their past, some politicians come forward and they own what happened and they apologise for it. Instead, what Reform has done is they have offered a number of positions ranging from, at the first, threatening lawsuits and saying that it is entirely false and defamatory through lawyers, then accepting that maybe some things had happened but certainly not the way that it was being recalled, and now this most recent position to call the sources that we've spoken to liars. Now, that is a series of positions which, as a member of the public, you might feel that a politician is not being straightforward and honest with you. And Farage has developed a lot of sort of credibility from people who feel like he is not like other politicians, that he says what really happened and he is honest with them. And I think when you have someone who says none of this happened and the people around him are saying none of this happened and the people who say it is are liars, but then there are more than 24 people who recall otherwise, that's difficult to square. Yeah,
and just moving forward, I mean, Farage obviously says this was 49 years ago. This is historic. It's schoolboy playground stuff. But what do you say to that, and why is it so important for you and the team at The Guardian who've been looking into this to keep going with this work?
Yeah, so I mean, it's one is I'd say it's not all 49 years ago. That's been a lot of what they've sought to say. But actually this spans Farage's time from when he was 13 at Dulwich all the way up to when he was about to leave. And the point that people have made, Peter's made this point, is the accusation suggests a track record of racist and anti-Semitic behaviour by Farage while he was at Dulwich. And then the question is, when he left Dulwich, what happened to him next? So, and then how might that have shaped his thinking soon after he left Dulwich? And then the way that he's responding to the accusations now, what does that say about his political leadership today and his ability to be open and honest with people?
Well, Henry, thanks for your work and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much.